The use of jump scares has become a very popular element of horror design, especially by independent developers. And for today's critical thought, I want to talk about why a lot of these just kind of fall flat and where developers can improve on. And it's kind of a bit of a warning, there is going to be a jump scare at some point in this video, and I'm not going to tell you when that is. Because why would I ruin all that fun? When most people think about horror, they'll probably think of one of two things: Resident Evil or the slew of jump scare focused games, especially those from the independent space, and definitely if you watch any major YouTuber who plays horror games. And in a previous video, we talked about the idea of event triggers and kind of their use and implementation, and jump scares are very much a focus of that. And depending upon who you are, you may come to really like them or really hate them. Now, the footage you're seeing up there is from Spooky's Jump Scare Manor, the HD edition. And there may actually be some jump scares in that corner. That's not the one that I'm talking about for this video, of course. And when we talk about jump scare design, this is, of course, about the idea of setting up something to scare or surprise the player, especially getting them when they're off guard. And the very best jump scares, the ones that kind of stick with us for the longest time, well, they completely come out of left field. And this right here is where we see a lot of problems with independent developers, is that they tend to focus more on the jump scare as kind of like a procedural thing. That it has to happen. You know, you're walking around, oh, we need to have something shoot on screen, or a random sound effect. But good jump scare design is really about getting the player into that sense that nothing's going to happen. And this is why for a lot of classic horror games, some of the best jump scares occur relatively early on, or they appear in a case where the player was not expecting them. And this gets, as we can probably guess, increasingly hard to do the longer a game goes on. Now, one of the more classic examples is, of course, now that up there that just like is flashing, that was not planned by me as a jump scare. Oh my goodness. But yes, one of the early examples of jump scares was the Resident Evil 1 Cerberus jumping through the window. And the reason why this was such a big deal is that nobody knew something like that could happen in the game. Nobody thought the enemy could just pop onto the screen without any prior warning. And that simple dog jumping through that window was just one of the biggest amounts, or one of the just complete shocks that anyone saw from the genre. Now, with that said, one of the issues when it comes to prolonged uses of jump scare is that the more it happens, the more somebody becomes accustomed to it. And when they become accustomed to it, it stops being scary and it starts becoming annoying. So, as you've been watching those like quick flashes of lights from that jump scare, this enemy attacking me, the first time it probably got you. Second, third, and fourth time, it's now just becoming an annoyance. And this is a major point about good jump scare design. It's supposed to occur when the player is not expecting it. And why a game like Spooky's Jump Scare Manor didn't really work for me, because jump scare is in the title. I'm expecting the game to jump scare me. If it didn't jump scare me, that could probably be its own jump scare. Now, when you're creating a jump scare, as we said in the last video, this is all about proper event triggers. And there's many ways to do this that have certainly gotten players in the past. There's, of course, the ever popular, if the camera is pointing a specific direction, we spawn an enemy, as the camera comes back. Or setting up things that the player is going to do. And in many ways, a good jump scare could be akin to a good Kaizo block or a Kaizo trap in a game. It's about preemptively knowing, the player is going to do this, so let's have a little surprise for them, shall we? And good jump scare design, it cannot be about just replicating what somebody else did or repeating your previous cases. And this is a major point that, again, a lot of these jump scare focused games tend to dwell on. Yes, it's spooky seeing something, pop out of the corner of your eye or flash on a window. Repeat it ad nauseum or every time the player does something, and it gets repetitive. And a lot of the lesser examples of jump scares will typically just keep setting them up again and again in the same way. And if the player, again, becomes aware or they know that this is going to happen, then the magic is lost. It'll be like me saying, okay, we're on a jump scare now. Now. Or maybe right now. Again, I don't know when the jump scare is going to actually go into this video. This is past Josh recording this. You think I really know what future Josh is going to do? I don't know. You're not up on your Josh lore, if that is the case. But when you are trying to set up effective jump scares, you really need to look at your bag of tricks that you have for your game. Can you do things with effective sound? Can you trick the player into looking in the wrong direction? Can you get them in an area where they weren't even expecting it, such as in your inventory screen or on the UI? And one of the more interesting aspects are games that try or use the safe areas of their game as a way of creating fear. A good example of this is from Fatal Frame. In the third Fatal Frame game, you have a safe zone that's in the main character's apartment, and for a good quarter to halfway through the game, nothing will ever appear in this apartment. And then, all of a sudden, you may get the flashing image of a ghost, or as you're walking down a hallway, maybe there's somebody standing there right behind you, and you have no idea where they came from. And these elements work really well, because again, they come completely out of left field to get the player. And here's an important point. Jump scares, they don't always have to be about, the scare. Or, all of a sudden the earphones just your ears start to bleed from a loud noise. Even something as subtle as just having a character appear out of nowhere. Or you look one way, you look back, and maybe there's somebody staring at you. Silent Hill 2 did that several times. You saw, I think, a pyramid head or either before their official introduction or afterwards. You would walk into a room, there's nobody there, you walk out of the room, and it's just standing there behind a grate or a iron bar wall, and they're not doing anything. You didn't expect that to happen. And again, subtle jump scares are often the best. But with that said, there is an issue that just about every indie developer I've seen who's done a jump scare, they tend to fail to capitalize on. And we're going to talk about that next after this quick break. And now for a quick thank you to our current Patreon supporters. And if you're interested in my books on design, they are available at most major retailers. 20 Essential Games to Study is for first-time developers looking to be inspired, and the Game Design Deep Dive series covers the history and philosophy of major genres with Boo! I'm sure none of you were expecting that little surprise now, were you? But a major point about a jump scare, and where a lot of developers tend to fail to capitalize on, is what comes after it. The issue is that for many indie horror games, they tend to do one of two things. The jump scare is just immediately followed by the player dying, such as in Five Nights at Freddy's, or the jump scare just does nothing. There's nothing that follows it. Yes, you get a spooky sound, or maybe a character pops on screen and leaves. Then you just go right back to what you were doing. And that's not how you want to use a jump scare. You want the player to have to react to it. Going back to Resident Evil, when that Cerberus jumps through the window, that wasn't a cutscene. You have to now fight that Cerberus and his friend who shows up. So for this jump scare, what you have to react to is that we have a loose release date for my fourth book, Game Design Deep Dive Horror. That is going to be coming in either late September or mid-October. We're still getting things exact, but at least it's a better estimate than just saying sometime this year. Also, if you haven't looked at it, be sure to check out my latest book on roguelike design. And yes, this is it's a jump scare advertisement. Maybe I'll start doing this in random videos going forward to keep everyone on their toes. But one of the major points that we see from good jump scare designers is that there needs to be something that goes beyond it. In a lot of the games that do make this work, they'll introduce a jump scare and then it turns into a chase or a stealth section, or again, something the player needs to be able to react to and respond. Because if they don't, then what was the point of the jump scare? And again, from the last part, a good jump scare should not feel procedural. It shouldn't feel like it's there because you just had to put it in. And you want to tailor each jump scare to be its own unique thing. And another thing that, as I said, we see from a lot of even AAA developers, such as with the Resident Evil games, is that they'll repeat the same jump scare. Such as in Resident Evil 7 with characters, popping on screen really fast, or, something whizzing by the camera. And again, the first time you do this, good. The 20th time you do it, it gets repetitive. And if the player starts to feel annoyed about your game, or they feel like it's just becoming frustrating to play it, or even just painful with all the various screams in their earphones, or to their headphones, or just to their speakers, they lose that sense of horror. You don't want somebody to be annoyed when they play your horror game. And in an upcoming piece, we'll probably talk more about kind of the pacing issues that go into horror design. But to begin to wrap things up for this, I guess, debatably spooky episode, that jump scares are an effective point about horror design. The ones that work, they will stick with and probably haunt people for some time. But the ones that do are very much outweighed by the ones that don't. And as a horror designer, less is more in this aspect. It is better to have a jump scare that is just so completely out of left field that nobody ever saw it coming, versus just sprinkling them every 5 to 10 minutes. Now, you can do kind of passive jump scares, such as having random lightning play in the background, noises, etc., that are completely off script. It could be just set to a random timer. But again, a good jump scare is kind of like the period at the end of a sentence. You want it to be impactful. And if you can do things that keep the player guessing about it, so much the better. Because another popular trope is, of course, you walk into a room, there's an item in the middle, you pick it up, and something spawns, or a boss drops down. We've all seen that meme of, giant room with no enemies, it must be a boss fight. Well, for jump scares, it's room with something important in the middle with it, it's going to jump scare me. Or the second I pick up something, I'm going to get jump scared. So, to wrap up this video, can you think of really good examples of jump scares, other than the one that hopefully got you in this video, that completely took you by surprise? And can you think of games that have overdone their jump scares, so much to the point that even if the game is called a horror game, it doesn't feel horror anymore. It feels more annoying or tedious. As always, check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games, and maybe have random jump scares going forward.